Data is a representation of our lives. It's, in some ways, a historical account of the way we live.
It's countless the number of ways that we can use data to solve problems. And many of those problems require complex analysis.
Computers can express abstract mathematical formulas as visual patterns.
Now, all of a sudden, we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of models available to us in AI that is allowing us to ask questions of data.
I think people, in general, find it a little frightening. There's big risks and big challenges, but there always has been in technology. And this is just kind of another evolution with AI.
But what's really important in that pursuit is to understand how kind of history rhymes through these technological innovations.
New problems emerge, new business questions are being asked. But what are the truths that don't change?
History is rhyming again.
I think people don't know how much SaaS is doing behind the scenes. It's underneath a lot of things. Every time you swipe your credit card,
making sure that that is indeed you.
That drug that you're taking, it was tested and proven out through clinical trials.
I can almost bet my money that SaaS is a part of that process.
For decades, SaaS has been involved in making sense of the data that has been the invisible infrastructure behind progress. But you have to remember that when SaaS started, none of that even existed. In the summer of 1976, when we incorporated, I was 6 years old. It was the first time that anyone recognized the word startup, and they had it in Forbes magazine. And that idea that this was a generation of young entrepreneurs that were sort of kicking around an entirely new industry. What we probably didn't appreciate at the time, but what we very much appreciate now, or we should try to appreciate, is the revolutionary aspect of what was happening and just how much the introduction of software and technology would change our society in the same way that Edison and electricity eventually led to the light bulb. The light was going off for us in a different way as a culture. They were exploring and discovering entirely new worlds and trying to imagine, how can we use this computer to solve problems? It was happening in pockets all over the country. Think about Apple and Microsoft and Oracle and SaaS. None of them were tech titans at the time. They were all experiments. They were all pioneers.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
All of this felt possible because of the era of scientific innovation that we were coming from.
World War II, space race. I think any time that as a society, as people are investing, right, to win, they're usually investing in new technology.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
We came out of the Second World War with an amazing focus as a country on science and technology. Inspirations like the race to the moon.
Became indeed for all mankind.
You turn on the television and they're advertising Tang.
Energy Tang for spacemen and Earth families.
Those were the golden days of American science.
Oh, that looks beautiful from here.
The National Institute of Health had a very keen interest in agriculture, largely because we needed to advance as a country in agricultural productivity.
Agriculture is California's biggest industry. It's a $3 billion a year business.
Agriculture's kind of a big deal. There's a lot of technology and a lot of science that has its origins in agriculture. So the reason statistics came out of agriculture is because of the need for analyzing experimental data.
People were already using statistics to make decisions.
Just because this crop of corn grows a little bit larger than this one doesn't necessarily mean that that's a better corn. It just means that that particular instance, it was better in that one instance. Is it significantly better? That involves a lot of probability and computations to decide whether or not there is a significant difference.
That's the role of statistics, to separate the signal from the noise. Statistical methods took a long time to evolve, and the thing that helped it the most was being able to compute the statistics easily. And of course, we were part of that revolution. We were in the 5th floor of Cox Hall, and we just went down to the basement with our punch cards and entered it into the punch card reader, and it sent the job over to Tuck in the research triangle, and it came back a few minutes later with the printouts. Punch cards, the way you entered the lines, it was only uppercase. Each letter was represented by some holes in a column of a card, so you'd have to get everything right, and if you messed up, you'd have to redo the card. You dropped them and they got out of order, then it was a lot of work getting it back together. There was a culture of really checking everything very carefully, desk checking all your code. That carefulness that was part of our culture greatly benefited us in the future. Computers got faster and it got easier to enter. There was still a culture of being very careful when implementing our algorithms. It showed in the quality of our product. By then, we had quite a few users. They were looking to expand the product, but we were stuck in the university at the time. It was not the place to continue to build a software product. Jim Goodnight arranged a separation agreement. When we started, it was just 6 people. And so we wondered if these big corporations were going to buy from a company that was only 6 people. So we wanted to give ourselves a name that would seem like we were a lot bigger. And so we called ourselves SAS Institute.
We want to ship you the best, most reliable software in the world.
We sort of had a knack of writing software for other people to use. That turned out to be very popular. It was a 3rd-generation language that we created.
So rather than the programming language, which you have to spend a lot of time to learn, it was a high-level language expressed in the subject matter terms.
It changed how many people could think and innovate with data. This access to compute really was a transformative thing.
Making use of information, using software that before SAS would require an expert to analyze data. And by putting the tools in the hands of everyday managers, they were able to move their companies and their organizations forward.
One of the industries that saw this as essential was the life sciences.
There was a phrase that SAS was born on the farm and grew up on drugs, in the sense that agricultural research was the founding of statistics and statistical computing. And then the biggest users became the pharma industry, and especially in the clinical trials.
The short of it was, we had a period where there were some real failures in the early pharmaceutical space.
Thalidomide was marketed in Britain by the Distillers Company as a morning sickness drug. It was withdrawn in 1961 after birth defects were identified.
The FDA then had to, well, how are we actually going to validate this system? What process will we use?
Statistics plays a large part in making that determination.
FDA required pharmaceutical companies to say, okay, you've done your clinical trial. What evidence do you have that this drug is better than that?
The type of analysis that we were doing for hogs and pigs and cows and sheep and stuff were very similar to what clinical trials are doing.
We pioneered procedures that really encapsulated these steps and workflow for the clinical trial itself. That makes it easier for others to use our programming language to conduct a trial.
Instead of everybody having to write a different program to do the analysis, they all use SAS and would verify that it was correct to the FDA. Just about every drug that gets approved by the FDA is approved because of SAS.
It just was this level of confidence that the FDA could have, knowing that, all right, we're going to put these drugs in market and we know they're safe. And I think that's really special and one of the more meaningful applications of data and statistics and analytics.
SAS has always been known for its statistical software. In fact, that's where it gets its name from, right? As time went on, more and more software products got added to the portfolio, depending on what else was happening around and what was necessary to solve customer-specific problems. And I think customer contact was a very important part of what made SAS so strong and so reliable.
Jim set the stage for all of us to learn that. You had to listen to the problem and then innovate to the problem. And did Jim ever say it that way? No, right? He exhibited it in the way that he approached problems and listened.
A hardware store. Inside, Father is buying a new hammer.
I think during those hardware store years, he probably recognized that the regular customers were the most valuable ones. That helping them every time they walked through the door, after that little bell probably rang, was the most valuable way to hold on to those customers. And as a business, that's what you care about. You want to retain your customer and help them. I do think 50 years of working with customers in various industries side by side puts you in a position to solve real problems.
So you can see here, this is the Savannah Mill, rendered beautifully in Unreal Engine, running at a crisp 60 frames per second.
And imagine if you are running the operation, to be able to do that in real time in a graphical manner, that's extraordinarily powerful to be able to manage that.
We have created incredible understandings uniquely around the pain points and some of the most difficult problems in industries.
I think that those are the areas where you want to have deep expertise because the stakes are high. That's really where SAS shines, on the most difficult, the biggest data problems that almost no one else can touch.
The terrorist attacks on September 11th changed the American legal landscape in significant ways. Two developments were the enactment of the USA Patriot Act on October 26, 2001. What all terrorists have in common is the need for money. And Title III of the new law is aimed at denying terrorists those funds.
It's to prevent criminals who make money overseas from using the very powerful U.S. banking system as a haven for their ill-gotten gains.
Before I worked for SAS, I was in the intelligence community. And one of the big problems that came out of the 9/11 Commission was our inability to connect the dots across different data sources.
We've got bits and pieces of information here, there, and yonder. Somebody's got to put it together, take charge of it, manage it.
All of a sudden now, there's this huge need for statistics and analytics. Dr. Goodnight heard that as a call to action. He knew he had the tools and the expertise at the company to figure that out.
That was a sort of a wake-up call for us. Let's find out exactly how this works. So we had to study and research to find out what are the rules that you use to determine whether or not money laundering is occurring.
Let's look at the pattern of life of what a typical good customer looks like. Let's look at the pattern of life of a customer that's trying to do something bad through a traditional banking system, and let's see if we can build models that allow us to identify the bad and help banks de-risk their entire client base. It really starts with the problem, and then it works backward. And that is a recurring theme for this company, is that you consistently prove yourself by working backwards from the problem.
Around the time where we were trying to solve this really critical industry issue, we also started getting recognized for our culture.
When I was younger, I remember seeing this special on 60 Minutes. I was kind of a bit of a 60 Minutes nerd for some reason. I remember seeing this special on a company called SAS. And this CEO, Dr. Jim Goodnight, who talked about his people being his number one asset, that just stuck with me.
It talked about the piano player in the cafeteria and the daycare and a gym and all kinds of benefits.
We've gotten a lot of recognition for our perks and our benefits, but it's so much more than that. A culture is not about perks and benefits. Culture is founded on principles, values. It's set from the top.
Jim's a huge introvert, so he's not a warm and fuzzy to have a conversation. But I would say he's one of the most compassionate people I've ever met. He cares about the work environment. He cares that they have good health care. Right? Did he do it because, it was some grand plan? No, he did it because he thought it was a good thing to do.
I think for Jim Goodnight, he saw the essential fundamental truth that if you took care of your employees, they would take care of the customers would come back, and you would be profitable.
It's about, how do I invest in the people that work here? Or how do I invest in their needs? How do I make them grow as people as well?
Do we treat each employee as if they make a difference? It's always been my philosophy, if you treat people like they make a difference, they will make a difference.
I think SAS sees me as a person first and not a tool, not a number, not just... SAS sees my value as an individual contributor first and foremost. And then I think SAS sees what I can do for them second. I think that social script might be flipped at some other places.
If you look at many jobs, particularly in high tech today, the work hours are so excessive. The work culture is so family unfriendly that this is not sustainable. The work pace is not sustainable. The trade-off of work versus the rest of life is not sustainable. And this is not just me talking. I mean, there's data, the Gallup studies, employees are disengaged. Employees don't trust their employers. The Conference Board has done a series on job satisfaction in the workplace as a whole, which has gone down pretty steadily. The workplace is not a good place. And so anybody who does something that's different from this, of course, stands out. And SAS, of course, is completely different than this. I still remember talking to Goodnight when I interviewed him all those years ago. And he said, you come from a part of the country, and this was true then and it's still true, where turnover is 20, 30%. And that's kind of considered to be acceptable. He said, you know what we call a manager with 20% turnover? An ex-employee. They would not tolerate this. And when I look at SAS, I believe they have a sound foundation because they take into account the realities of human well-being. And we need more humanity.
My mother had a stroke when she was 63 years old. I was distraught. SAS had a service that helped me research rehab facilities that are high quality and helped me out in terms of making a very hard decision when I was also trying to be emotional support for my mom.
My father, he spent most of his career dealing with being hired and laid off, hired and laid off. It's not even just financial stability of working, but also the way they're treated. I got to see the impact it had on my dad, on my mom, on my brothers. The emotions of this for me is tied to the fact that when you find a company like SAS that truly lives this idea of people, of dignity, and wanting to provide a place of work that provides stability, that people can plan their life, it creates loyalty and a fierce want for this place to succeed. And I think it's part of why it has succeeded for 50 years. The thread that Dr. Goodnight's carried through is that he's always said we're a company of people helping other people. So the technology is not the point. The technology is simply what you have at that moment in time that allows you to take advantage of creating insights on data. There's almost like a anthropological arc. There's human element of the same problem repeating over time, and it's just a different slight twist on how you solve for it. The first innovation for SAS would be like the language. The language created a very convenient syntax for more people to learn how to ask questions of data. Now, I'll go all the way to the end of that arc.
And today, it's all about AI. Generative AI, agentic AI, and even quantum AI. The list goes on.
AI is another rendition of how do we make it more convenient and easier for customers to ask about data and systems in their environment.
You've got to understand not only how to use the software, but how to interpret it and understanding what the output means.
Those tools are very powerful. Almost anybody can use them, but we don't want them to make bad decisions.
The problem with having a very sharp knife is that you could cut yourself.
We have automobiles with wheels that we drive every day. We call cars. Early on, we said, you know what? These cars are great, but look at how many people are getting hurt. It might make sense for us to, have some signs that says, stop here, go there. And over time, we've built on that basic idea, that basic premise of when you drive, you should be safe. We put in seat belts, we put in airbags, windshield wipers, like all of those things were added.
I think it's in our nature to try to use data for good, that we see opportunity in data and that it's our duty to make sure that it's being used in the world in a constructive way and hopefully in this way that's helping people.
This is a multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder, multi-dimensional matter. And I think it's a moment for leaders to step up.
What if we get this right? Not just SAS, but the collective we, all of us in the room. What if we are actually able to reduce infant mortality rates? What if we're able to reduce police interactions with citizens and improve everyone's safety with the help of AI? What if instead of diminishing, AI actually helps us strengthen democracy? It seems to me the promise is well worth the pursuit. I trust you agree.